So, Vladimir, you've just had the inaugural meeting of the Brussels Lean Startup Circle and seemed to go very well. Some good reactions there. Yeah. Why is Lean Startup still so hot?
I think that the promise of it is so exciting, actually. I mean, suddenly there is a process that promises, at least, that you can go from an idea to a validated business model. And and that's pretty exciting. You have some sort of a recipe or a method that can help you get there. This is not what we used to have a couple of years ago.
But you still start with, from the business model canvas idea, you start with some guesses, obviously.
Yeah.
You have some ideas, you get 9 little boxes to fill in. You mentioned validation, but how do you get from this is what I hope or what I think I'm going to do to actual concrete reality of a business?
What was the question really? Is the question how do you validate the guesses, or is that's the question? Okay, so that's the most difficult part. That is exactly why we started this Lean Startup Circle, because I think for everybody it is slightly different, and that's where you need a lot of creativity. There is a generic recipe that says basically you first want to make sure that you document your guesses very well, that you make them very explicit, that you think about what are the biggest risks. And at the beginning, usually these are the channels, the revenues, the problem solution fit. And then once you figure out what the biggest risk is, you want to go and then validate them, which was actually your question. The way that you do it is depending on your phase, actually, because in the very beginning, when you're starting with an idea, you don't have the product yet. The only thing you can do is you can talk to people. And then you basically go and validate if you're talking about a problem, and you validate, am I solving the right problem? So you have to talk about that problem. There's a big difference also between going out and telling people what do you need and actually validating your problem, as in the Lean Startup. And that's some people mix that, I think. It's really about coming up with a vision. I have that, I want that, and then what's really the meaning of customer development is you're developing the market. You're searching for the market for the product as specified. As you go later, you can put something. You can put some things out. You can put them in the market, and you can then start measuring really effectively things like what is my conversion rate, what is my conversion rate from the visitors to signups, from signups to returns, from returns to actual revenue, etc.
Do you think that maybe in some ways actually the fundamental thing that has changed is that people actually acknowledge these are guesses? Whereas previously it was, here's the concrete business plan and this is what we're going to do, and by year 2 we will have reached this stage in the hockey stick, blah, blah, blah. And part of it is actually saying, these are guesses, let's actually go and experiment. It seems it's very scientific now, because the ability to measure is open to everyone now. So it's almost like if you don't take that opportunity, then you're, I was going to say failing, but not failing, but
a big disadvantage.
Denying yourself, disadvantaging yourself.
No, I think the big thing that changed, I think there are 2 things, as you say. The one thing is indeed realizing, okay, we're starting with guesses. I think indeed that's a big difference. But the other thing as well is this recipe thing that I was talking about, this methodology thing. Like suddenly we have some way to map out, to make a roadmap for ourselves of how we validate it. Before that was a business model.
Yeah.
Before you had it, and then you had to plan how to reach it, and then you execute it, and then you hope for the best.
But one of the things I see as a risk with the validation process, which I do believe is necessary, but the risk is that you overly validate. You can get into the analysis paralysis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a very good question. I've been there. How do you avoid that?
But isn't the nature of the experiment that there's a defined exit point?
I think indeed, I think regardless of how you would define your experiment, etc., indeed the danger is that you can indeed get stuck in there. And that's why basically what Steve Blank says is that you have to start in parallel with your product development. That's what some people, when they think about lean startup, etc., they say, okay, I'm going to go and validate, but they don't realize that at the same time you have to start developing. Why is that so important? Well, to avoid the analysis paralysis and to get as soon as possible out there, but also because it's very different in our mind and imagination than when you really have to implement it. Then you have to make it real. And that's the part that you must go through. And I think what I see often when people go for the customer development, that they tend to disregard that part. So the advice basically, and coming back to it, the advice is start the two in parallel and sing them.
One of the, I guess, from a product management side of things, and again, I'm software basis as well, like you are. One of the worries always when you go out and validate is that, yes, you should listen to your customers, but your customers are not always right. How do you what is the risk associated with you ask people what do you want, they tell you what you want, you build what they want, and they don't actually want that.
But that's not what you do. That's exactly not what you do. You don't ask customers what you want. No, that's the philosophy is you start with a strong vision. You, as an entrepreneur, as a product manager, as you said, you come up with a vision, not your customers. You say, this is going to be a solution. And then, in one way or another, you face the customers with that solution, whether by just implementing it and giving them to use it, or by showing them in the very beginning, etc. And then you validate whether, you also, of course, have to know why you've done it. You have to get some result, to get bigger retention, to get bigger revenue, to get people engaged more, whatever. And then you want to validate whether the feature or product you've implemented actually results in the assumed benefit.
There was a pretty good reaction here tonight.
Yeah.
There was a strike.
Yeah.
3 days before
For Christmas, amazing, yeah.
And more people turned up than actually registered. Okay, there were some stragglers, let's call them. But there was we had a full house.
Yeah, it was amazing, yeah.
Well done you. One thing that came out quite strongly for me was that people were saying, we want a peer-to-peer group learning thing. There are lots of experts in place, lots of people who have done it before willing to help us. But in actual fact, we want this kind of peer-to-peer learning experience. So, that's certainly one takeaway. How do you see the future direction of the group? Because this is the first one, having a drink, it's Christmas, but now it has to become a reality.
What I've learned from the discussion, we had a very good discussion, was that, as you said, indeed, the focus will have to be on peer-to-peer. The big challenge is how do you make that work effectively with 30 people or more. And that's something that I'll still have to figure out with the group actually. But there has to be, what I've also learned, there has to be some structure. We'll have to, for example, we'll also have to think, maybe also work with the presenters a little bit, or at least give them some frame or structure. And we'll probably also have to combine like the open stuff with the presentations.
So look, as Tech Brew, we always do, the most important question is, so I have a few assumptions about this.
Okay.
But I'd like to validate it. And the question is, what's your favorite beer?
That's a very tough one. Huh? That's like Christoph said, choosing between your favorite children. And it depends on the season, I would say. For me,
given that it's winter.
Given that it's winter, then I will go for the dark stuff, like Chimay Bleu.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well,
thank you, Vladimir.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you also for
and
your
I hope
support.
the group goes really well. I'm really looking forward to it, and Thanks for sharing the time with Tech Brew, and wish you great holiday.
Happy holidays to you and everybody else.
And to
Happy
all our
holidays.
millions of listeners. Happy holidays. Bye.
Ciao.